Okay, so hey, thanks for asking us to present, and I think it's quite exciting to be working with CanPKU on some of the work that we're talking about here, um, and I think we have a good amount of information to share, but are also very interested in the discussion and hearing feedback and thoughts as we go along. So we've tried to structure things to allow that. So we'll be talking today about patient-oriented research for rare diseases. And Dr. Don Richards will start off speaking first, and then you see the other presenters here. And maybe when we all start, maybe we could just say a brief word about who we are before we launch in. Um, so yes, here Don will talk about an introduction to patient-oriented research, and then we'll use an example of the CanPKU InformRARE registry. And Beth Potter and I will talk about that first, and then experiences as a patient partner and representative of patient organization. That'll be John. And then when we talk about clinical trials, again, we'll go with Don and then John. And at that point, Sylvia will take the lead from the InformRARE group in the presentation. So maybe with that, we'll go ahead. And Don, if you want to get started.
Yep, thanks a lot. So to start off with, for those of you who have joined us, I'd just like to get a sense of if you've heard these terms or not. So I think we're going to launch the poll. And if you can just let us know if you've heard of the terms patient-oriented research or patient engagement. And it looks like all of our attendees have responded anyway. So it's kind of split. A couple of you have heard, or one of you's heard the term, and a couple of you haven't. So what we're going to do is kind of set the stage with a little bit first about, oh, here we go. I guess I have to share the results. And yeah, we'll start by just talking a little bit about what these terms mean, and then we'll provide some additional context from an example for you. Okay, so first of all, in case you're wondering, health research, and these are a couple of definitions that have been provided by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. That's Canada's largest funder of health research. And health research is basically asking and answering scientific questions that lead us to new knowledge, and that is applied to improve the health of Canadians. And maybe I should just let you know too before I get too far along. So I am here on behalf of Clinical Trials Ontario, and we're an organization that's primarily funded by the Ontario government to help improve the environment in Ontario to do clinical trials. Even though we're a provincial organization, what I'm going to be talking about today is applicable all across the country. So sorry about that, but that's health research to start off with. And then patients defined by the same organization is actually a fairly broad term. So here it's people with a personal experience of living with a health issue, or it could be their informal caregivers, their family members, and their friends. So all those people bring a perspective of what it's like to live with a certain experience. They might be slightly different perspectives, but again, it's important perspectives that they bring to the table. So next slide. So this whole concept of patient-oriented research, you can think of it as research that engages patients as partners. So usually research is done by a team of researchers, potentially students, sometimes also healthcare providers. And these are teams that actually engage patients on the team to execute the research. This is usually research that actually focuses on patient-identified priorities to help ultimately improve their health outcomes. So again, it's a bit of a twist on research because research, tends to be questions that are set by researchers and healthcare providers. So in this case, patients bring their perspectives to the table as well. It's done by a little bit different of a team. So again, patients are part of the team. Sometimes also decision makers and policy makers are part of these teams as well. And just like health research, the idea is to apply what's found in the research to improve health and healthcare systems and practices. And this type of research aims to bring the findings into practice sooner than potentially you would normally see research put into practice, by bringing all these different members of the community together to execute on research projects. So further, patient engagement in this patient-oriented research is really intended to be meaningful and active collaboration. So it's one thing to have to say that you've got patient partners on a team. It's another thing for them to actually be really actively engaged with the team. And that could be around governance, so making decisions about the project. It could be about setting the actual research priorities and the research questions. It could even be helping do some of the research. And lastly, sharing research findings. So we see this a lot in the patient world. So I live with rheumatoid arthritis, and I'm part of a small advocacy group where we're often sharing the findings of research on our social media channels and webinars like this one, and videos, etc. So that's what patient engagement and patient-oriented research is. And then there's just a few guiding principles that people who do this type of research are asked to keep in mind. So one thing that's a little bit different about this type of research is this idea of inclusiveness, that the patients who are on the team, they're not arm's length from the condition that's being studied or the question that's being studied, but they're actually living it themselves. So they are bringing very vulnerable aspects of their lives to the team, and people have to be really respectful of that. That leads to support. So support might be safety, making people feel safe within the team, knowing that what they're talking about that could be really personal is not going beyond the team. And it might even mean training and education for the researchers and clinicians who are part of the team, not just the patient partners. Third is this concept of co-build, and that's the idea that patient partners are really part of the team from the start of the project, and they're integral throughout the project in providing, insights, opinions, their lived experience, etc. And then lastly, this idea of mutual respect. So it doesn't matter where you acquired your knowledge about the condition that's being studied, whether that was through your life experiences, whether that was many years in school. Everyone's knowledge about the condition or the question that's being studied is equally as important. It doesn't matter where you learn that. So these are all guiding principles to help out with patient-oriented research. So next I'm going to pass it on so we can hear about some of this happening in the real world in your space.
Thanks so much, Dawn. So I'm Beth Potter. I'm an epidemiologist and a health services researcher based at the University of Ottawa, and one of the research leads for an example of patient-oriented research that we wanted to talk to you about today, which is the fairly new, so we've been up and running for about a year, research network called InformRARE. And the funding for InformRARE actually is from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research that Dawn already mentioned. So InformRARE is a Canada-wide network, and you can see some of the participating centers on the map there, of patients and families, healthcare providers, policymakers, methodologists like myself, experts in research ethics. And we're all working together. There are more than 60 investigators in the network to carry out research that ultimately aims to improve care for children with rare genetic diseases. And there are three conditions that we're focusing on in this first few years of our work, including PKU. And so we aim to generate knowledge that will help to support decision-making about disease therapies. And so decision-making in terms of individual patient care, so decisions that have to be made by patients and their families together with their healthcare providers, and also decision making at sort of the health system level, so decisions that are typically made by policy decision makers and their advisors. Patient partnership and engagement has been an important component of InformRARE right from the beginning. And so we have patient partners as investigators. There are 7 patient partners who are part of our network and have been involved in the work and co-developing it right from the beginning, including one of the patient partner leads for the overall network, Maureen Smith, and then some patient partners who are part of each of the rare disease communities involved in the conditions that we're studying. And so for PKU, that includes John Adams and Nicole Pallone as well, who some of you may know. And then in addition, we've more recently formed some patient advisory groups. So we have new for us a youth advisory group, which includes about 10 adolescents who have one of the conditions that we're studying, and then a parent and caregiver advisory group separately from the youth, which is about another 10 members, and some of you may be part of some of these groups. And so we're working together with our patient partners and with our advisory groups to make sure that both the research questions that we pursue as a network and also how we carry out our research is aligned with their priorities. So we'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Ryan. So one of the key initiatives of InformRARE at this stage is that we're building patient registries for the metabolic conditions that we're studying, including PKU. And so here, registries have been defined in different ways by different groups. But when we say registries, we're talking about longitudinal databases, so databases that have information that follows patients over time. They're set up with patient and or their family members' consent, in the case, for example, of children, to collect information about the health of individuals who have a particular diagnosis. And so the information in disease registries can come from different sources. For example, it can come from patients' healthcare providers, from their medical charts. Oftentimes there's information that's really best reported by patients or their family members themselves. So for example, if you're interested in something like how someone feels, their quality of life, their well-being, that would be patient and family reported information. So patient-oriented registries emphasize the priorities of patients and their family members when deciding what kinds of information to include. And their purpose is really to help us better understand a disease or condition, understand how the health of individuals with that diagnosis changes over time. And also registries can be used as a platform to support studies, including clinical trials, which we'll talk about later in the session, about which therapies work best. And so I'm going to turn things over to Pranash to talk about the Can PKU InformRARE registry.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And I'm Pranash Chakraborty. I'm a metabolics physician and researcher at CHIO and the University of Ottawa, and also the medical director for newborn screening in Ontario. What we are building a registry for PKU families and patients and clinicians in Ontario, and the purpose is to collect information from patients and families as well as clinicians over time about PKU and really the outcomes that we see in PKU. And I'll get to that on the next slide. And I saw that John messaged me that not everyone may know what CHIO is, but CHIO is the Children's Hospital in Ottawa. They did do a branding exercise and decided to call themselves CHIO and no longer the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, but it's the Children's Hospital here in Ottawa. Right now we're focusing on pediatric patients with PKU. And so for now, the eligibility is for children 18 years or younger with PKU and who are receiving care in Canada. And I think obviously over time, we will want to both continue to include information from those children, but also open this up to adults. But for now, we were starting with pediatric patients. And people can enroll directly. You can participate directly, or you can enroll and get involved in a registry through one of the participating treatment centers, and we're working to involve all the treatment centers in the country. The platform, this will be hosted on the NORD, so the National Organization for Rare Diseases, InformRARE platform. And there's several reasons why we chose to work with them. One being that they are a patient organization for patients with rare disease. They have worked with the National PKU Association in the United States before, and we were able to, chat with people who have used their platform. And obviously they know about and are very interested in rare diseases. We looked at a variety of potential platforms before deciding to go with NORD. The governance of the registry will be with CAN-PKU and InformRARE in collaboration. And this is a nice mechanism for patient-oriented research where we have patients directly involved in the research teams, as well as a patient organization, as well as the institutions where patients are receiving care, as well as academic research happening. So, everyone being involved in the overall structure and governance of the registry is very important. Another thing that was really nice and important about the NORD registry is that it's structured for the patient organizations to own the registry, while allowing for that kind of governance and input and collaboration with researchers and clinicians. Vitally important, though, is still that identifiable and patient information is still owned by that patient or parent and guardian, the surrogate decision maker for someone who is still a dependent. Next slide, Ryan. Thanks. So this, I'm not going to talk through everything on this slide, but what I want to highlight here is that the information that we're focusing on collecting, you can always think about 9 million things, pieces of information, pieces of data that you think might be useful to understand how care is being provided and learn all about people living with PKU and their families in the country. But that becomes both very burdensome for patients and for clinicians to share that information. It's actually hard to maintain the quality of that kind of information as well. So, for this registry, the plan is to focus on outcomes, and outcomes really telling us about how people living with PKU are doing. And these outcomes should really help define the effectiveness of a treatment, or what might be a policy priority in a province or in the country. So knowing that this is something we wanted to focus on, work has been happening over the last few years, including patient partners, to develop a core outcome set. And what that is a small number of priority outcomes for the health condition, for PKU in this case, that should be measured in all research happening on that condition. There's a publication that'll be out soon about the work that we did to help define a core outcome set. But in short, there's 4 main areas in which these outcomes were prioritized. 1 was growth and development. 2 was life impact. 3 was aspects of the disease, and you'll see that's pathophysiological manifestations, but really coming down to Phe concentrations and phenylalanine tolerance is the main surrogate outcome about the disease process itself. And then finally, resource use. That always is important in terms of trying to optimize the systems of care and help decision makers understand what needs to be done to help patients with the disease. So keep these in mind when Sylvia speaks later about the trial that we plan to do using the registry. And the trial will use these outcomes. So here I pass on to John. And I think everyone knows John.
I knew nothing about PKU until the baby came into the world, our youngest son, 33 years ago. So I'm in the 33rd year of my postdoctoral fellowship, being the parent of a child with PKU. I am wearing 2 hats in this project and in this presentation. as an individual parent, as participating in the project as a whole, and as a representative of CAM PKU for the development of the patient registry. And these are just my perspectives, and other people will have other perspectives, and I acknowledge that. One of the roles of CAN PKU for the founders was to do what we could to make contributions to research, helping to, and in this context of this project, I've had the opportunity to make some suggestions to refine the research questions, to set priorities. And one tangible example of that is one of the questions that we're going to examine is to be refined is the glycomacropeptide formulas, or GMP formulas, as complete, intact, or natural protein versus the more traditional synthetic amino acid based formulas, and what difference that makes in terms of patient participation, patient adherence to treatment plan, and outcomes, and the other outcomes. We want to apply learnings, help what we can to bring from other spheres of activity of patient advocacy, such as bringing some clarity to the question of what are medical formulas and what are medical foods. This is going to be part and parcel of this research project. And I just have to note that I took a fairly deep dive into these topics as I had to prepare for 2 trials at the Tax Court of Canada, fighting the Canada Revenue Agency over an misinterpretation of the Income Tax Act and the eligibility of people with PKU who have an enzyme deficiency but who are on time-consuming therapy, and did the PKU diet qualify as a therapy for the purpose of the disability tax credit eligibility. And so the interesting challenge here was to try to be ready for a judge who was probably pretty smart, pretty analytic, and did not necessarily have any scientific or medical background. Would they understand and to explain what is PKU, what is its diet, and how it actually qualifies as a medical therapy. So I bring all of that kind of thing to this exercise. Next, please.
Thanks, John. So we thought we would pause here in case there were any questions that people wanted to raise now. And Tanya, I'm not sure what the mechanism for that, would that be on the chat, that, or can people unmute and ask a question?
They would have to send it either through chat or through the Q&A option. Either of them can be addressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe what we can do is, I know we have some poll questions coming up again, and why don't we keep going, and then just before the poll questions, if anyone has questions or wants to make a comment, please put it in one of those Q&As or chat areas. And if there's anything there, we'll pause before the poll questions and discuss those. We're going to hand back to Dawn now.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm going to set the stage because you're going to be hearing about a clinical trial that's, I think, in the planning stages, and John's also going to share some of his experiences as a clinical trial participant. So I'm going to prime you for those discussions. So basically, clinical trials are a type of research, and they're a type of research that involves people. And their purpose is to test what we call health-related interventions. And interventions, basically a fancy word for treatment or therapy, and also look at the health outcomes that are related to those interventions. And I mean, you'll hear this a bit later today, but they often help us answer questions about the safety of the intervention. Does it improve or cure or help disease or people who are living with diseases, especially if they help in a way that's different from current treatments that are available? And importantly, does the intervention help people feel better? So I know those are some of the things that are going to come up a bit later in the discussion as well. So I think many people, maybe not in this community, but many people tend to think of clinical trials being for drugs. And maybe that's also top of mind because we can think of the COVID vaccines and how they've just, a number of them have come out of this process, and there's still a number that are in the trial process. But drugs are really only one type of intervention. On the other end of the scale, probably this community is a little bit more familiar with diet interventions being part of what's studied in clinical trials, and lifestyle. And then in the middle, you'll see a number of different things. Could be devices like, could be an insulin pump or a pacemaker. It could be a different type of surgery. It could be a type of radiation therapy, or maybe a diagnostic procedure. So all of those might be different treatments that are studied with clinical trials, and they might be done in single interventions or in combinations with others. So next slide. So why do we do clinical trials? Well, they are a form of research, and so they help provide us with data, which is also called evidence about what we're testing. And that really ultimately helps us decide what therapies or interventions might work best for people, or maybe for certain populations. And this really helps us make decisions about how healthcare and is allocated, and how decisions are made related to this. So these are the general phases of clinical trials for drugs. That they can also span other types of interventions. But again, probably what's maybe most top of mind is the COVID-19 vaccines and what we've recently seen. So phase 1 studies are done in small numbers of people, and this is sometimes also called first in human. So this will be the first time that the intervention goes into generally healthy people. Sometimes for rare diseases, phases might be combined, but here I'll just talk about them separately. But this will go into a small number of healthy individuals. They'll be monitored very closely to see the safety of the intervention. And the study may then advance on to phase 2 or not, and that might be for a number of reasons. But if we just assume that it meets what we call the study endpoints for phase 1, it can go on to phase 2 studies. That's done in more people because we've seen that there's a safety profile for the intervention. So we do it in more people. It's a little bit longer usually than phase 1. And here we also start to look at individuals who are living with the condition that we're studying. So again, we're watching safety, and we're starting to look at if the intervention does what it's actually supposed to do in the population that we're studying. So again, depending on what the results are of phase 2, the intervention may or may not go on to phase 3. Phase 3, though, is done in many thousands of people. In the case of the COVID-19 vaccines, many of the phase 3 studies were in tens of thousands of people. And so here we're often comparing the intervention to no treatment or standard of care generally, so what's already used in the population. And again, we continue to look at safety. We continue to look at if it's doing what it's supposed to, and ultimately we'll compare it to the other current treatments that are out there. So after phase 3, things can be made generally available to the public, or we say that they go to market. And phase 4 studies are when things are widely available for use. And then we monitor side effects and long-term effects of the intervention in a very large population of people. I think there might be a little bullet, Ryan, that comes up. Oh, no, okay. So that's kind of the general phases. Again, things may or may not continue through the phases of clinical trials pending the results of a phase. There are other options for you to consider. Clinical trials aren't the only option that are available if there's one out there. So an option is receiving no treatment, which may or may not be a good option, but that is an option. You may choose to receive standard treatment or a different form of treatment than what you're currently on if you're living with a disease or a condition, or you might participate in a different research study. So It's a really good idea to talk to your healthcare provider about all of the options that are available to you if you're considering participating in a study. And they should hopefully be able to talk to you about potential known benefits and risks of these options. Maybe Ryan, you could go back to the phases of studies. John, would you like to make a comment there?
I just thought for this audience, it might be useful to look back on the example of the clinical trials for the development of the drug known as Kuvan. And I would just point out this one, because we're PKU is rare, and this is InformRARE, that the phase 3 pivotal clinical trial that proved that Kuvan had a good safety profile, was clinically effective or efficacious, and had good manufacturing quality controls. Had a total of 80 participants, not 1,000, and 88 people had started that trial, and 80 completed it. And that was the basis of the submission to the Health Canada and the US FDA and the European Medicines Agency, et cetera, et cetera. So I just, I would just wanted to acknowledge the world of rarities when it comes to clinical trials, and it can be very, very challenging to get adequate numbers of participants to get to outcomes and findings which are statistically significant. So my theme here is it's really important for people in the world of PKU to seriously consider participating in available trials.
Thanks, John.
Thus ended the lecture. All right.
No, that's all good. I appreciate you providing some context that the community can relate to. And also, just like you said, that as I mentioned with rare disease, sometimes the phases may be combined. And to your point, there are often way less participants than in some of the other areas that are studied. So we often get asked questions about, making decisions about clinical trials and what sorts of thoughts might help people here. So we've just listed a few things for you to think about. So first of all, you'll want to ask about the costs of the clinical trial and how those are covered. For example, you should not be asked to pay an entrance fee. You shouldn't be asked to pay for the study treatment. You might have to pay for parking. You might have to take time off work to participate. But you should check into that and see how that's going to affect you personally. You should look at the qualifications of the clinical trial team. So have they worked in this area for a long time? If it's important for you, are they affiliated with an academic organization or some other trustworthy organization? And then the clinical trial itself and the application will be reviewed by a number of different agencies and boards and organizations. So in Canada, they need to be reviewed by Health Canada, our regulatory agency. It will also need to be reviewed and approved by a research ethics board. So that's going to be at the site where it's happening, and they look at it from the purview of the safety and welfare of the participants who are part of the study. And it also needs to be reviewed and approved by the institution or organization where it's taking place. And lastly, if all those things are satisfactory to you, you'll also need to meet what's called the eligibility criteria to participate in the clinical trial. So Pranesh talked about this for the registry. It might be a certain age, it might be a certain demographic. These are characteristics that you'll have to meet in order to participate in this study. So the concept of informed consent in any kind of research project, not just clinical trials, is really important. And consent is voluntary. So it's completely up to you whether or not you wish to participate in a research project. It's important to know that you can withdraw your consent at any time. So even if you initially sign up to participate in this study and for whatever reason you decide that it's just not right for you, you can withdraw from the study. And importantly, consent is an ongoing process. So you may have heard of the informed consent form. That's something that you sign at the start of the study to say that you understand what's going on and that you would like to participate. But consent is more than just that. Consent is about asking questions throughout the study, making sure that you're comfortable with your participation. And also, if you do decide to withdraw your consent to be part of a study, you can request that the data that you provided and any biological materials you provided be removed from the study. That may or may not be possible, but it's certainly within your rights to request that. Next, participation in any research brings potential benefits and potential risks. Again, this is a really personal decision for you to participate in research. So you're going to have to decide if those potential benefits outweigh the potential risks. And those potential benefits and risks will be different for each research study, clinical trial or registry study or otherwise. They will be described in the informed consent form that you're provided, and you should feel free to ask lots and lots of questions of the study team so that you can really understand what you need to know to make an informed decision about participation, as well as throughout the study. Again, don't forget to ask any questions that you feel would be helpful for your participation. So that brings us to another poll. Just curious if you or a loved one have ever participated in a clinical trial. So I think we're launching the poll. So maybe just go ahead and respond. We have at least one yes, because I know John has participated and is going to share his experiences next. So again, we've got kind of a mix here. I'm going to share the results this time. So we've got one of you who has participated and a couple of you haven't. So hopefully for those of you who haven't, you've learned a little bit here, and I'm going to pass it off to John because again, he'll provide some great context as someone who's participated in a study about all the things I just talked about and what that was really like for him. So over to you, John.
And maybe just before John unmutes, just if anyone does want to raise any issues or questions, just please put it in Q&A or chat.
Okay. So this actually has a double perspective, myself and my son. He actually participated in the phase 3 trial for Kuvan way back in the year 2007 for the simple reason that he wanted more protein in his diet. And that photograph wasn't taken in 2007. It's much more recent than that, 2016. He has added 40 pounds of upper body muscle mass he was the tall, skinny weakling with no stamina. And he's now, just as of last week, is a permanent, graduated from probation as a permanent firefighter with the City of Toronto Fire Department. So he'll be there for you. If you happen to be in Toronto, he'll be there for you on the worst day of your life if you need that kind of help. We knew in his case it was for the trial we're talking about with InformRARE is a little different, and we'll get into that. It's not for a drug approval, but his participation, we knew in 48 hours that from blood tests that the drug was working for him because his blood phenylalanine level dropped 75% in 48 hours and eventually dropped 90% over the course of 4 weeks, to the point where it was getting too low, and we had to start adding protein to his particular therapy. For myself, my late wife, his mother, passed away of a combination of ALS and frontotemporal dementia in 2014, so I was happy to participate in a phase 2 trial of a neurologic study. Did exercise make a difference in preventing or helping a person recover from a phenomenon known as covert strokes? These are not mini strokes, these are micro strokes, which are not necessarily obvious. Originally were thought as part of a natural process of aging. We're not so sure about that as we understand more about neurology. And so that's little old me undergoing a brain ultrascan. So I actually, and I also participated in for 90 minutes on 3 occasions with cognitive testing inside a magnetic resonance imaging machine. So they really lit up many parts of my brain. And I said, of course, this is going into my personal health record. And they said, of course not. This is research. But if we do see anything of clinical significance, we will let your personal physician know. And all I can tell you is it's radio silence. So it seems I have a working brain with no obvious deficiencies that are disease prone, shall we say? So that there's the good news. And I found it was the intervention in this case was the role of exercise. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I could use a bit more exercise. So it served many useful purposes, and it was actually a fun experience. So that's just my, and I think I can speak for my son that he enjoyed very much the outcomes of participating in his clinical trial. So
Thanks, John. And we'll hand off to Dr. Sylvia Stockler now from UBC.
Yeah, so now we're coming to the particular trial that we have planned to do in the course of this InformRARE project.
And Sylvia, if you could just introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, so I'm Sylvia Stockler. I'm a biochemical geneticist at BC Children's Hospital, and I'm the head of the division of biochemical diseases here. So we're seeing all the PKU patients that are born and diagnosed by newborn screening in British Columbia. We are seeing them until the age of 18 years, and then they go on to the Adult Metabolic Clinic, which is a different organization. But where they are also followed longitudinally. Again, as you know, the trial that the project that we're talking about is for patients that are under 18 years old. So in that trial, we want to assess a nutrition-based intervention that will be launched from the registry platform. So from that platform, which we are creating and Pranesh has described. And we want to compare two formulas, which probably to you are not very unfamiliar. The one formula, the new one, or the one that we want to assess whether it's better, is the glycomacropeptide-based formula. Which contains natural protein from whey and which is very low in phenylalanine. And we will compare it to other formulas that are on the market or that people are using, which are based on just free amino acids, which contain all amino acids but phenylalanine. And the purpose of that study is to evaluate the impact of those medical formulas on life impact. So you remember the core outcomes. There's one core outcome on life impacts, and that contains quality of life, how patients are feeling with this kind of formula, how they can accept it, and how they can adhere to the intake of the formula. We will, on the one hand, look whether the intake of this formula, of the new formula, affects the phenylalanine tolerance. So does it change the phenylalanine tolerance? Would a patient who takes this formula, which contains a little bit of phenylalanine, then have higher phenylalanine levels on their monitoring? And would they have to reduce their natural protein for that? Or is it the other way around? Or does it not change it at all? And that, of course, will affect acceptability and adherence to the diet. So this is what we want to assess, and this is new. I mean, these formulas, of course, also have already assessed in clinical trials, but the question that we're asking here has not been answered yet. And eligibility will be children between 4 and 18 years who have been diagnosed with PKU and who are taking one of the amino acid-based medical formulas and who are receiving care at one of the participating sites in Canada. The design will be a crossover trial. That means that all children will be exposed to the new to the glycomacropeptide and also to the other formulas for a period of time, and then it will be switched. So somebody who was on the glycomacropeptide first would go on the amino acid-based formula and the other way around. So what's really the innovation about it? So why do we need that trial? Are we just doing it out of fun, or what's the particular aspect and the particular gain of knowledge about it? The innovation is really that the participants that will participate in the trial will be recruited from the PKU registry. So it will be something that we're calling a registry-based trial. Which is pretty new, because so far all the clinical trials were designed in a way that patients just were recruited freely from the clinical sites. And then the trial was conducted, results were collected in separate files, so they were not even merged with the clinical files, and that was it. And if somebody, let's say at a later stage, wanted to integrate those data that were collected in that trial in a new trial, it was quite difficult. So the data that are collected during the trial will also become part of the registry and therefore may inform future research. Do we have another one? Yeah, recruitment. So we still have, of course, we discussed a lot in our group who could participate in such a trial and what should we consider. So of course, it will be, should we consider the age of the patient, severity of the disease, particularly, I mean, there will be some differences in the response in somebody who has a classical versus a mild form of PKU. And there's also the question that we still need to figure out what would be the motivation of somebody to participate in such a trial. I mean, John told us about his experience in participating in a clinical trial, and he had a lot of motivations, right? Because he participated in a trial that was about a condition that his wife had. And it also was a trial that offered him the opportunity to do some exercise, which otherwise he might not have done, and also to get to get some kind of information about the function of his brain. So there was a lot of motivation for that trial. But what would be the motivation for a PKU patient to participate in that trial? And we know, but also from our own experience, but also from feedback, of course, from the patients themselves, that normally the children are used to the specific formula that they are taking. They are started on a particular formula very early in life, and then they are used to it. And then it's really difficult sometimes to change it. Do they want to change it for the purpose of the trial? And how could we motivate children and adolescents to participate, to make those changes all the time? And also because the trial also requests that participate need to do regular blood work. So they need to submit regular dry blood spots, more than they might be doing in general. And we also need food records. We also need to know how much phenylalanine are they taking, and how does this correspond to the phenylalanine levels that we're measuring, and also to the amount of phenylalanine that they get with the formula. So will this be a barrier? So is the trial doable at all? Again, what is the input of the patients on this kind of trial? So still a lot of questions, and we have prepared also a poll that Ryan will present, and hope that we get some answers from you participants.
Well, hi, everyone. for those in the audience, we'd welcome you to answer this first poll. I'll just pull it up here. So this first poll is asking whether you, if you are a child or if you have a child, would potentially be interested in participating in the type of clinical trial that Dr. Stockler described. So comparing glycomacropeptide and amino acid-based medical formulas. And the response options are yes, no, or I don't know. We've had one response come in so far. Okay, so I'll share the results. So we have our one result that says no, which is very helpful for us to know going forward. And I'll present our second poll question. So this question will help us to understand more of the challenges associated with participating in a clinical trial like this. So we'll relaunch this second poll. So specifically, if you or your child were to participate, which of the following aspects might be challenging for you or your child? And you can select all that apply here. And you can also let us know in the chat as well if you have other ideas as to other aspects that might be challenging for you. Okay, so I'll share those results. So it sounds like the top three applied to the person who responded. So changing from current medical formula, adapting to a new one, and also switching back and forth between medical formulas would be challenging. And we'll go to our last poll. So this poll is asking about the motivations to participate in this type of clinical trial. So specifically, what aspects might be motivations for you or your child to participate in the clinical trial? Again, you can provide comments in the chat if you have other ideas of motivations.
Looks like the question there talks about challenges, but I think the responses are the right responses. So we're interested actually in motivations with that question.
Thanks, Beth. Okay, so I don't think we've gotten a response for that one. So I'll move it on.
So Ryan, there's just two comments in the chat. One is from Prentice suggesting that we share an email address so that if people are watching the recording, they can send us feedback on the poll questions. So I'd be happy to share my email address on for the participants in the recording. I don't know if they'll be able to see the chat. So my address is just Beth Potter, so beth.potter@uottawa.ca. Oh, and someone else says the poll goes away when you talk and I'd like to answer. So if we can relaunch that poll, Ryan. And then we also have a comment from Tanya saying, anytime we need to motivate our son, it's bribery with Fortnite dollars. So not something we considered to sign as a child, but that's it's good to hear kind of real life experiences for sure.
Tanya, for some of us, you might want, who don't have young kids, you might, what are Fortnite dollars?
It's a video. It's a video game and it's currency to spend inside the game.
As a parent, I understand the concept of bribery.
Yeah, I just think that some of these little kids may not see the value in the researcher participation as of yet because that's just not in their mentality to do so. They may be interested in looking for a medical formula that tastes better or has more convenience or easier. But like you said, often they're already happy with what they have because it's all they know. So I just wonder if maybe something tangible outside of something that gives value that we see as adults may benefit a kid to have.
And for that perspective, that's evidence of the value of having Tanya as one of the parents on the advisory panel as part of this project. All right.
So thank you for responding to the poll. We've heard that some of the motivations to participate would be participating in research for PKU itself, that this medical formula might have a better taste, texture, or smell, that it might be more convenient or easy to prepare, that it might make it easier to stay on a PKU diet, that it might provide a greater feeling of fullness, and that a GMP diet would provide more intact protein and less synthetic individual amino acids.
Thank you, Sarah, for your input.
So I think that's really the end of our discussion or our presentation. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I was just suggesting that we also type out the email addresses that you can send feedback to. Especially on those poll questions and those concepts of what the barriers and motivators for participating in research would be. I think another thing that would be really great to get people's thoughts on is about other important questions that you think we should be researching, and especially questions that might be answerable or that we should think about how to answer them using information that we would be collecting in the registry or similar trials using the registry. So any thoughts around any of those things or other general thoughts would be really welcome to hear about, be happy to hear about. So there, Ryan's included the general InformRARE email address as well as Dr. Beth Potter's address. I'm happy to get an email as well. It's pchak@geo.on.ca, whoever you're comfortable contacting. And many of our colleagues across the country in many of the metabolics and PKU clinics are participating in this work. So feel free to talk to them as well. The more information we can get, and the more engaged patients and patient researchers and closeness of the clinicians and academics, I think will make this a success. Just before we sign off, I think, do any of the panelists have any other things that they would want to say? I will also have a quick look back at the chat. No, I think we had a chance to say everything we wanted to. So thank you again, and thank you to John and Tanya for the opportunity to present here. I think hopefully we can do this again, and maybe even with some of the progress and results from the research that we're planning to do along with you.